until GPS, how are you going to stop? I mean, there's the theft now. We've got the normative dimension, but we know it's not terribly effective. And the technology presents itself as a more effective way of getting the result that regulators want. And I think that I mean, in the long term, the future is probably a great deal of technological management, but there's an intermediate period, quite a long one, where probably Google cars coexist with old-fashioned road traffic legislation still in more complex areas or something. And I think that, you know, for lawyers, that it's going to be a real challenge to figure out how to sort of operate in these mixed environments, and that's. So I don't think cyber lawyers are on the wrong track at all. It's, and I think Lessig saw something coming.
Oh, he did, and I think, God, there's so many things in there to try and respond to, and so I think there's a lot of very good points. I mean, the first thing is, I should say, I don't think Lessig was wrong in what he did.
No.
You know, I think Lessig. I think the trouble that I have is that everyone has tried to be Lessig after Lessig. No, there's nobody who's just said, I want to look at what law does in this space.
No.
They all, because in essence the problem was, it's like, you know, it's like HLA Hart came along at the very outset and just said, here are the rules, and everyone went, gosh, we have to write like HLA Hart all the time. Lessig sort of set the tone of the debate so early on, and I agree with you, his book informs so much about the reality of the wider world. The trouble is that lawyers, mostly in the UK, don't sort of engage with that wider Lessigian model and things like that. Regulatory theorists do, and that's why I still agree with you that regulatory theory is the future of where law is going, and the people who are doing this kind of thing are aware there is more structures out there than the legal normative structures. Perhaps what's got me doing this, though, is you try discussing it with people who only see the legal normative structures, and they just can't see. Now, maybe they are the dying old breed, but not for a while, I don't think.
You might, but I would just say one other thing.
I
mean, your interest in the rule of law, I think, is entirely very well placed, and I mean, the way you said, well, how do you recognise the authority of putative lawmakers, or where you have contradictory? I mean, these are big challenges for the rule of law. But where technological management is being utilised, like what those people did at the Warwick Shield Golf Club, do lawyers say, well, this entirely escapes rule of law considerations? Because I mean, you might say, well, when it's in a private area, you can do pretty much what you like. But if we have public regulation that uses technological management rather than rules, it seems to me that the spirit of the rule of law requires there to be some procedural, some discussion about this. But it's not the old Fullerian ideas about clarity and non-contradiction and stuff like that. But there's a point at which there has to be a debate about the adoption of these technologies. Otherwise they insinuate themselves into our regulatory environments.
They do,
in a way that Lessig is warning about the private interests of copyright holders.
And I think that's sort of another separate project that I have, which is my Computer Says No project, which is what happens when you replace human intelligent agents with digital intelligent agents as part of the decision-making process. And I come back to, I'm very wary of this future environment that you describe, because it's very easy for utopia to become dystopia very quickly. And one of the things I've been doing everywhere I go, and anybody's interested in privacy and how privacy can be affected, and I've been doing a talk called Orwell Plus 30, is that there's a book called The Circle by Dave Eggers. And if you haven't read it yet, you really should, because it's a terrifyingly easy dystopian vision of how companies like Google can just control our lives, so we have no freedom. But anyway, the Computer Says No thing, I think I have a problem with that, and my problem is it comes back to something else David posted when Unless it first brought out code, another was decided. He did a book review of it, and he had a bit in it called The Ought of It. Right. And he said, it is obviously possible that technological tools can control and regulate us, but we need to stop and ask the question, ought they? Yeah. Is there a legitimacy in doing this? And this, the reason I call it the Computer Says No project is because computer-regulated decision-making or computer-augmented decision-making is massively popular with governance and regulators because it introduces a number of things. It introduces a kind of certainty. It introduces a transparency. You can see the decision-making process. It introduces a consistency in decision-making process. But it also takes away the freedom that a human has to make a more, what you might call, more nuanced decision. So I'm interested in that kind of thing. And my concern is, I think if lawyers say, well, wait a minute, this is a different, I'm not saying that's what you're saying, Roger. If I say that if lawyers kind of stand back and say, well, you know, these computer-controlled golf carts that only go certain places, that's just a decision for that local club to make. That's fine, perhaps on private land. But if you can imagine something like a system wherein all cars in the United Kingdom had their speed controlled by a centralized computer system, and it controlled your speed as you pass through different areas and things like that. All sounds fine and all sounds wonderful, but what happens when you lack the freedom in that decision-making system to allow for you know, allow for a bit of freedom? And that's where the law comes in, I think. As lawyers, our question should be, you know, what Lessig was saying. As lawyers, we should be asking, who's designing this? Why? And is this right or reasonable or fair? And we've been through it in the past in a very small way with things like DRM technology. And we've been through it in the past in a small way with things like Google's technology with copyright and things like that. But it's going to keep coming back, and the problem we have is the technologists are always running ahead. Hey, I can build an electric cat. Wonderful. Let's go and build an electric cat. And what will this cat do? It will be a great friend to children who can't leave the house, and will do this and will do that. But nobody stops to actually ask the questions. And I think that's where lawyers are very important. And I think it's also very important we don't forget the legal principles, because it's what made us lawyers in the first place. But yeah, I don't disagree, and I think you're right in the point you're making, that in 50 years' time there won't be traffic lights with green and red on them. The cars will just stop automatically at a junction. There might be a signal for pedestrians or something, and that will be it. But a lot of it is also the kind of stuff Jonathan Zittrain was talking about beware of the future that you think you want. And at the time he wrote The Future of the Internet, I did poo-poo it a bit and say, yeah, well, there's always going to be alternative, open networks. But now, more and more with these kinds of things and applianceization, it's starting to look much more prescient than it did. So, I agree. I agree.
Hi. So I'm coming from not a law background. I'm coming exactly opposite. I'm computer science.
Right.
And I'm working on the legal compliance issues. And so what we are doing, we're trying to make our software compliant.
Right.
And we were giving lots of examples. For example, like cloud. This is like really like one of the hardest examples we can have. The data goes to cloud. Now, who's responsible? Who's liable? What is the jurisdiction? And the solution that we are thinking is that we have to have a system, mechanism, a software that can be compliant with multiple jurisdictions. But then it comes like, I'm from Canada. In Canada you have maybe it's easier jurisdiction compared to US because they try to resolve a bit of the conflicts, and they try to give a solution that, okay, if you're in Ontario, you can deal with this law instead of the federal. But you go to US, you have a software you built in Canada, there are lots of 52 states, 52, especially I was working in healthcare, there are many conflicts. Then you come to Europe, they talk something else, and completely, there's just too much conflicts. And all of this brings lots of problem, and solving these conflicts I don't know like if like lawyers have some kind of solution for these conflicts, because like this is one of the biggest problem I'm looking at, and I'm trying to solve it with the software engineering problem. But these are the things that you were talking about, I think, from the other perspective, and we are also looking at them.
I think if lawyers had solutions, there wouldn't be any jobs for lawyers.
We have solutions. It mostly involves employing a lawyer.
Okay, so like, for example, in my PhD, I created a mechanism, a framework to be able to understand and model these laws, because if I'm developing the software, I understand requirements, but then I don't understand regulation that much. I have to understand legal requirements.
Yeah.
But yeah, like we never ever said that we are going to like do something that lawyers like, we don't need lawyers. It's always at the end of the day we need lawyers to say that if our systems are correct. But we try to understand this to be able to make better legally compliant software.
The issue of compliance is a massive one, and I'm afraid I'm not going to be able to offer you the solutions to it. In essence, what I would say is, what you're trying to do is make the best of the complex situation, and it reflects the fact that what digitization has done is it's made it easier for companies, even very small companies, to very quickly become global companies. Now, before digitization, what would have happened is you'd have a small company who did something in one jurisdiction. You'd have learned that jurisdiction, and then when you went to move into another jurisdiction, you would find out what the regulation was and what you had to do to. And it was more incremental. You're at the other side of the same problems I'm talking about. The problem is the minute you go online, you are everywhere. You're exactly the same as the individual. That the minute you put something up there into the cloud, online or wherever, suddenly anywhere where somebody can access it, you're within that jurisdiction, you're under that shadow. I'm going to say something which is going to sound very nasty, but wait till I'm finished. I don't mean this to really sound the first bit of it. In some ways, you're part of the problem. And I will explain what I mean by that. The problem is that, and this is something I genuinely think is something that needs to be done, much more than is already done. The problem is that, I said earlier, that the engineers, the smart people, they can do things. They've got great imagination, which you don't want to stop. They can say, let's build a robot cat, and I know how to build a robot cat, and I can think of 1,000 things this robot cat will do which will be wonderful, whether it's a real cat or a virtual cat. And you don't want to stop them doing that. But the problem is they then develop something, and then once they've developed it, they come to a lawyer, and they say, I've done this amazing thing, and I want to do this with it. And the lawyer goes, okay, now let's see, where are you going to do it? Let's find compliance and everything like that. And then what happens in many cases is the little bit of what Roger was talking about as well. You build it into the system. So you then say, right, what do I need to do to make my system compliant? And I will build these things into the system. But the trouble is, and this is where we need to work closer together, the lawyer understands the law, and you understand your software. The lawyer says to you, the law says this, and you say, okay, the lawyer said that the law says this, I think. And then, because you don't have 20 years experience of being a lawyer, and then you build your system to your interpretation of what the lawyer says. And this is just the problem of sort of communications. It's common in communications theory. Nicholas Luhmann and others talk about it. The fact there's different languages, and this is the computer says no projects. The problem then becomes that the computer program you think is carrying out the operation of the law, but it's not, because it's carrying out the operation of the law as it's been interpreted by the designer of the program, which is actually different. And what we really need are more lawyers who can explain the law in a way that designers can understand, and more designers who can understand the law, and more of that interaction. Because there's some one of the systems that is particularly interesting to me is there is a computer-based, question-based system which is used in the UK for benefit applications. And this computer-based system is basically, it's 42, I think, is questions that ask things like, can you walk 30 feet unaided? So, can you physically walk 30 feet unaided? Can you lift a certain weight? Can you sit for a certain amount of time? And it is a very turn-by-turn mechanical system. And at the end of it, a score is awarded. And if your score is high enough, you qualify for a benefit payment, some kind of disability benefit. If your score is 1 point under that, you don't qualify. But it doesn't ask questions like, can you walk 30 feet? Well, yes, but with difficulty, the answer is yes. And that's because the system is an interpretation of what the law says. The law doesn't say, can you walk 30 feet? The law says, that somebody has to be incapable of working, these kinds of things. But we've systematized. And it comes down to computer says no. I write it through the computer says no. What can I do about this? Nothing. Computer says no. And that's it. And it's removing the human element. And you get the same thing, the mortgage applications. Anybody who's had to do a mortgage application, it's just endless. And it's all computer says no, or computer says yes. And so that's the other project. But you're seeing the same thing. And you're trying to solve it the way you think you should solve it, which is building it into the system design, which is right. But at the same time, this is what I'm talking about, we're losing the essence of being the law and the lawyer. Sorry. No.
One of the problems, I myself and people in my community found, is that we are trying and we wish that we can engage lawyers, but always lawyers are too busy, too expensive, too hard to find. And sometimes, for example, there's a workshop that we are having now for, I think, 6-7 years. It's called Requirements Engineering and Law. And the aim of us was to bring lawyers and talk with us, define requirements and all that. We had few lawyers, few times. One of the very famous one in US, Peter Swire, that he works with even US government several times. He is one of them that he came several times and he's pretty engaged. But it's still lots of separation between lawyers and requirements engineers, software engineers, computer scientists. And I think that there has to be a way that's there are now cyber lawyers as you're maybe hated by other lawyers, but we like you, we want to work with you maybe. So it may be nicer if we can have something that...
I think that's great. I don't think we're hated by them. I think we're misunderstood
Okay.
by other people.
That was my interpretation.
No, I know. But I think the problem is exactly that, because many people who are interested in being cyber lawyers often find themselves having to define themselves with the legal practice and the legal framework of it. And this is what I'm trying to say. I think as lawyers we need to be more willing to just be lawyers in this area, as well as, that's not to take away from the Lessig style people, and I think they're very valuable. But I think we need more people who are willing to just stand up and say, we're lawyers, and we understand the law, and we understand the challenges of this area. There are some very good people who are lawyers in this area. Christopher Millard is a very good lawyer in this area, as an example. But Christopher Millard is still quite unusual in this field, because he does write about legal problems. He approaches it as a legal issue. And that's what I'm saying we need more of this. We also need, I think, more of lawyers. The trouble is also that lawyers, practicing lawyers rather than academic lawyers, have this issue that people don't want to talk to them until things go wrong, usually. Lawyers are one of these people, nobody likes going and talking to a lawyer. It's like going to the dentist. You get that card through after 6 months, you think, oh God, yeah, I've not been to the dentist, I really do need to go. You're never happy to get that card through, but you kind of go. Otherwise, you go to the dentist when you've got something wrong. You don't go weekly to have a chat with your dentist about how to keep your teeth healthy. Lawyers are in that same kind of vein. People like to come to them when they have a problem or a challenge. And I think the problem with that is not so much that, it's lawyers don't kind of think to get out there first and be more proactive and to be in business. Lawyers still see themselves as lawyers rather than businessmen or businesswomen, perhaps. That's a little bit what Richard Susskind has talked about as well, about lawyers having to change their views of what they are. Sorry.
Yeah, sorry to, you mentioned taxation a couple of times. And I really got excited because I thought you were going to say a little bit more about that.
Oh, right.
So I come from the accountancy side,
right.
From the law side. So that area of the law that accountants are very effectively stolen from the legal profession. Tax advice, as a industry, we make a huge living out of it. But it's particularly exciting now, I think, the taxation from the complexity of this, when you add technology, cyberspace, international law that exists, because international tax law is a nightmare, but that's great for advisors. I must be sounding very cynical.
No, but I'm just thinking, people don't speak to their tax accountant before the problems arise, but they don't speak to their tax lawyer until after the problems arise. Is that the same thing?
Yeah, that's the thing.
But that's because lawyers are more expensive than accountants.
Oh, are you sure?
It depends.
Sorry.
So the area I thought we might sort of be able to extend into in this, or I don't know if this is what you want to talk about, is
I always love to talk about tax.
How do you tax certain activities? It's very difficult to define what the activities are. From a tax point of view, is it where the production is happening? Where's the customer base? Where's the R&D? Where's the distribution? So that's obviously what gives rise to the potential to use tax havens, places that wouldn't like to be called tax havens, the inconsistency of the interpretation of law and the laws themselves. The US isn't consistent with so many other jurisdictions, so therefore the tax opportunities, the US doesn't like it, but the opportunities to not be taxed, as long as you're not a US citizen, it's a big disadvantage from a tax point of view.
Don't remind me.
It's a huge area, but is that something that, are you incorporating that in your study?
Not into this, no, because I should say that I'm not, tax is, as you will know, is a massively complicated framework set of agreements that you really, I think, have to be a tax expert in. We do have some very good tax law experts who do work in some of this area, but I'm not really a tax expert. And it's not something that I would be building into. It's the kind of thing that I would be encouraging others, perhaps, to step into. And in particular, there's a really good tax expert in the LSE who I think is really interested in international tax frameworks and things like it's not called settlement, where a company is based for economic purposes. I can't remember what it's called. But he's interested in this, in sort of double taxation.
Permanent establishment.
But a little bit of things that are very interesting, which I'm sure you know more about than I do. You'll know that mostly what countries are doing is they have this sort of Ottawa framework. The OECD is kind of saying that what you do is you try and treat the internet neutrally in terms of designing tax regimes. In some countries, I don't know if they still do. I know historically the US kind of kept said for interstate purposes that they would treat the internet as being a zero tax for interstate taxation. Is that right? I think that certainly used to be the case.
It's under contestation.
Right. That's
because of the question of physical presence in states,
right.
Amazon's distribution centers and things
right.
like that.
That sounds right, but I know that was historically because I hadn't been keeping up to date with what was going on.
California challenged that.
Right.
By enacting a law saying that they had physical presence wasn't sufficient.
Right.
For tax on money.
And there's some interesting kind of frameworks that online companies can do. Of course, historically the famous one in the UK was that companies would set up their online activities through a company registered in Jersey, and may then even set up a distribution centre in Jersey and then ship goods to the UK, and therefore save on UK VAT. And that loophole has mostly been closed, except for goods under, is it now £12? It used to be £15. It's a relatively low number anyway. But that doesn't cover, as I'm sure you all know, the other loophole, which is where the goods are purely digital, because then there's no physical importation of the goods. And the wonderful thing, which I'm sure you're aware of, which maybe not everyone's aware of, is the way that Amazon operates its Kindle store. Because books are quite interesting. If you buy a physical book, In terms of UK VAT, that is zero rated. A physical book is a necessity, in essence. So a physical book, you pay no VAT on it. If you buy an e-book, though, an e-book is treated as a luxury item rather than as a necessity, and therefore attracts even VAT at 20%. If you buy a book from Amazon.co.uk on your Kindle, where do you buy it from?
Luxembourg.
You buy it from Luxembourg,
3%.
and they pay
3% VAT.
So Amazon can pass on to you a discount in terms of what they charge for the Kindle book, as opposed to any other competitor who is not so organised, but they are also still making more money. So Amazon have deliberately designed it, so every ebook they sell in the European Union is sold from Amazon SRL in Luxembourg, and they pay 3% VAT, and because of the single European market, as long as one country attracts the VAT, then you don't pay VAT in any other market in the EU. So they have designed their bookstore. That being said,
What's the reason for staying in the European Union?
that being said, I have no idea where the servers actually are. I presume the servers are in Ireland, I'm guessing.
Yeah. California, probably.
They might be in Ireland. They've got a huge thing in Ireland as well. So the servers are quite probably in Ireland. They might even be in the US. The servers are probably not. The book has never gone anywhere near Luxembourg. It's a complete legal fiction that you agree to when you sign up. When you buy an Amazon Kindle and you sign up, there's this complete legal fiction which takes all the taxation and sends it to Luxembourg. So why does Luxembourg charge 3%? Well, because they get 3% of all the books that are sold in Europe, which for Luxembourg is quite a lot of money. You know, they'd rather have 3% of all the books sold in Europe than 17.5% of the books sold in Luxembourg. So it actually works out quite well for me.
In response to this, of course, it would say, you know, differential tax rates through tax havens. There was initially, back to 2000, there was very much the big move to name and shame of a list of uncooperative tax jurisdictions. But actually the steam went out of that, and particularly because of the US were much more keen on exchange of information. And possibly after 9/11, the emphasis went on let's have information about everybody, and of course tax information is massive. And the online, now we provide, we're all self-assessors, so don't blame your tax advisor. HMRC will come after you. You can then sue your tax advisor if you like, but sorry, that's very cheeky to say that, but I mean that's effectively, we're self-assessors. We give some sort of information you can give to a close relative, you give to HMRC, and actually that's a huge issue, isn't it, about the privacy, the potential exposure you've got as an individual.
There's a related one. I don't know all the details of this because I can't remember them in detail, but it's a bit in the back of my head. You know this Swiss bank case where essentially a hacker illegally obtained details of Swiss bank accounts. So this was a breach of, in the UK, the Computer Misuse Act. Now this hacker, having gained this information, then started selling it to governments. And the German government paid, I think it was €4 million for this information, which they then used to track down German citizens who were hiding money in Swiss bank accounts for the purpose of avoiding taxation in Germany. The UK government were in negotiations to buy it, but I think somewhere along the road the media coverage embarrassed them sufficiently that they didn't actually buy it. But what they did say is, under a data sharing agreement with the German tax authorities, they knew who they needed to go after, and started basically, whether this was true or not, they started a publicity campaign saying, if you don't come forward and tell us, it'll be much worse when we come to you. I mean, this is terrible. The idea that tax authorities could find it at all legitimate to use illegally obtained data to pursue. I mean, this is two wrongs don't make a right kind of thing. But they were doing this. And of course, yesterday or the day before, I think David Cameron was suggesting if you owe the taxman £1,000, he should have the right to automatically take it from your bank account. Whereas if you owe the tax man £20 million, you should keep your OBE.
Yes.
It's all a question of scale. But I mean, yeah, but I mean, the tax, you've got to be very careful about the line between tax avoidance and tax evasion.
Oh, well, absolutely.
You know, and the most famous one is, of course, how Starbucks never make any profits in the UK, because everything that they generate in the UK, they pay in intellectual property licensing fees to Starbucks in the Netherlands. Although the UK government have now done a sweetheart deal where Starbucks will relocate their European headquarters from the Netherlands to the UK, so they will now pay, in the same way Amazon has done, they will now pay all their corporation tax in Europe in the UK, but not at UK corporation tax rates, which I think is ridiculous.
I used to be a lot happier about that avoidance evasion line. I used to be a lot happier about where that line was, just with the general anti-avoidance rule we have now. That's the case of, it seems to be, it's turned so much towards the authorities saying, it's what we think.
Exactly.
It's what we think that line is.
I mean, I'm not generally going to be a natural defenseman, but I feel very sorry for what's happened to Gary Barlow in the last few days, because he was basically told this is legal, and then the revenue said, well, actually, we've had another think about it, and no, it's not. Which seems very, again, rule of law. It's contrary to the rule of law to have a legal rule and then to change the interpretation of it after you've been given advice on it. And my understanding is they had HMRC advice that it was legal. And now HMRC are saying, no, it's not. And I think that might be challengeable.
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't help image and all that stuff, public profile, but the chances are that it's a very typical structure.
Yeah.
It accepted it was probably okay. He probably wasn't in that position of saying, can I really do this? The way highly financially literate people will often say, what, can I really do that? I mean, he wasn't even in the room. I'm sure, I mean, there's no way, I can't imagine Gary Barlow coming away from his piano and saying, let me just have a look at that structure. Tell me it was boxes and arrows that you've done in the right way.
I know, but he must have looked at his income and looked at the tax effect, you know. And like,
he probably never knew what his income was.
I find that, you know, at the end of the day, he got his OBE or whatever he got for his services to charity, you know, where he was in that privileged position because of the wealth that he had, because of the tax he didn't pay. You know, I mean, at the end of the day, we're all responsible for our own affairs.
Oh, I don't know. I just wait for the tax man to come. No, I don't. This is probably self-assessment.
Well, I think actually, you might be right with that one.
Yeah. I think
Harry Redknapp, there's a fascinating thing. So, a couple of years ago, I Googled it actually. I was so impressed with the conversation that I let the undergraduate tax students hear it. And I said, okay, what do you think of this? Did he know anything about it? And it was just Harry Redknapp saying, well, I don't know, I've talked to my accountant and he said I could do this. So I literally spent 2 minutes on a conversation and I didn't really know what was happening. And it was very plausible. I think that he left it to the advisor. That's my feeling. But it's just interesting to see. You know, they may be experts in it and may take a real interest in this. It is the money. People tend to take an interest in it, but there's a vast grey zone about what is avoidance and not. And then, is it moral? And should we have to ask the question?
But Harry Redknapp pretty much insinuated he couldn't read or write. He said, I can just about sign my name. That was. That is what he actually said in court. Yeah, he did.
In reality, most people who are running a business will go to an accountant and say, this is what I'm paying you for, get me the best deal, so that, you know, I'm making more profits. That's part of the deal, isn't it?
But I think there's a very big difference perhaps between the individuals like Gary Barlow or whatever who, you know, may have been more or less aware of exactly how near to the avoidance evasion line it was. And large corporations like Amazon that are basically just using legal structures to create complete fictions. I mean, to say that you buy your digital e-books from Amazon in Luxembourg is complete garbage, because that e-book has never gone anywhere near Luxembourg. It's never, well, most of the time, it's never seen a server in Luxembourg. You're buying it from a .co.uk website. Every other aspect of your relationship with Amazon is governed by English law or Scottish law, depending. So every other aspect is governed by a UK legal jurisdiction, apart from your contract for Amazon Kindle, which is a separate contract that you get when you first get a Kindle. When you get a Kindle for the first time, the contract is on your Kindle and you accept it. So it is a complete fiction, just designed just to allow them to use the different jurisdictions. Now the problem with this is it's not necessarily a problem in tax law. The problem is it's easy for Amazon to do that because of their size. If I'm setting up a competing ebook business, it's much more difficult for me to actually legitimately claim I have a business in Luxembourg without actually setting it up. And if that was just a shell, HMRC would break that shell down and say this is rubbish. And the other thing is it actually breaches Amazon's own terms and conditions in other ways, because while I buy my books from Amazon SRAL in Luxembourg, it says in my agreement that I buy my books from Amazon.co.uk, and they have a jurisdictional license clause, which is to comply with copyright law, which says that the books are sold in copyright terms in the UK, so economically they come from the Luxembourg company. And in fact, there is an individual. The other thing, the last thing I'll say about the Amazon Kindle is that, of course, you do realise you never own your books. Any book you buy and install in your Kindle, you do not own it in any way, shape or form. Amazon, in the goodness of their heart, give you a license to be able to read the book, but at any time they can withdraw that license. And going back to Roger's point earlier about the power of the technology, there is the tale of, I think she was this Swedish lady who had a Kindle. Now you shouldn't be able to do this, but she did manage to do this. She managed to register it both with Amazon.co.uk in the UK and with Amazon.se in Sweden. And the reason for this was, it was actually quite practical for her. Most of the books she was interested in reading were the Swedish local books that she got through Amazon.se, easier and more accessible. But she was also interested in English language books, which are cheaper on Amazon.co.uk because of the size of the market. So she would buy English language books from Amazon.co.uk, and she would buy Swedish language books from Amazon.se. Now theoretically you shouldn't be able to register your Kindle with two accounts at the same time. She did manage to do so, not by some sort of deliberate attempt to defeat the system, just because she tried it and it had worked, because there was a bug in Amazon's system hadn't picked up. It had been previously registered. They thought it had been deregistered from the other account, but it hadn't been. So she was buying both these books, and one day she got up and she turned on her Kindle and there were no books there. And she thought, this is rather odd. And so she went into her email, and there was an email from Amazon telling her that her Kindle account had been terminated because of a breach of Amazon's terms and conditions of service. And all the books that were on her Kindle, she had left it connected to the Wi-Fi. She should have turned off the Wi-Fi. All the books that were on her Kindle had been removed from her Kindle for breach of Amazon's terms and conditions of service, and that her account was deleted. And that if she wanted, she could register a new account with Amazon Sweden with that Kindle and start afresh. But because she had breached the terms and conditions of service, Amazon removed the books from her device because she never owned them. They were only ever licensed to her. So you see, the Amazon are kind of playing it both ways. They're saying your Kindle under copyright terms can only be licensed to one store, but in economic terms, the books all come from Luxembourg. So they're actually kind of playing two different games, which is, to me, is, well, I suppose if I was Amazon, I'd do the same thing, to be honest. For being honest about it.
Actually, we have to, unfortunately, start moving out of the room.
Good stuff.
Thank you very much for that, Professor Marie. Thank you all.